Our presenter this evening is Jessica Gutknecht, also at the university, and I'll be introducing her soon. In our 6th year, Linda Kingery with our University of Minnesota Extension Regional Sustainable Development Partnership for the Northwest region of our state is the leader of this program. And we have a group of extension staff from across the state that help planning with this program. A few of them, at least a few of them are on tonight. I know Anna, like I mentioned, and Jake Overgaard is also on. So as you look at, if you think back to that map that we just saw of the participants popping up throughout all over Minnesota, that's been assisted by the additional staff that we've been adding to the planning committee for this program. So over the years, we've been expanding that, and now we have a good representation of extension staff that are assisting with not only selecting all the presentation topics and the presenters that we have, but also just planning all the logistical setup of the Local Foods College. So we have the Local Foods College is an 8-week-long program. Can be viewed live each Tuesday at 6 p.m. like we are right now, but you can also view the recordings at any time later on. And in some cases, we have groups of people that are getting together to watch this together, which is also great. And not only are this year's recordings available, but the previous 5 years can also be viewed online as well if you want to look back and get that education. So we're thankful for this technology. It allows us to reach a wide audience, and it's a very effective way of delivering programming for us within Extension. So I would like to introduce our presenter, Jessica. She is an assistant professor within the University of Minnesota, our St. Paul campus with the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate. And her website is listed there where she posts news and information about her research and her work on the campus. So Jessica, I will change a couple things here, and then I will pass it over to you right now.
Sounds good. All right, so now everyone should see my slides. See, this is my first webinar, so I appreciate everyone hanging with me during this. So, yeah, my name is Jess Gutknecht, and another thing to introduce myself is that I am unabashedly in love with soil. So that's my Valentine's, special Valentine's thing for all of you. I really am fascinated by the way that soil works and all the dynamics and the functions, and so thanks for listening in tonight. And also, you know, I really certainly wish that I could be with all of you across the different countries and across Minnesota to even see you dig into your own soil. And I hope that by the end of this webinar, you'll be ready to go grab a shovel, or at least you'll be ready to grab a shovel when your soil thaws out a little later in the spring. So I took a little bit of a look at the things you were posting of what you hoped to get out of this session tonight, and I'll just kind of go over them really, really quickly. If I didn't get to your specific question, there'll be definitely chances to answer questions. So someone asked about the effects of micronutrients on soil health. I will show a little bit about micronutrients, but we won't necessarily go into that much detail, but I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards. And for anyone, my email address is going to be on the last slide, so you'll always be able to ask me questions later. A lot of people just want general information on soil health, which is certainly what we're going to do. Improving garden yield, how farmers can contribute to soil health. We'll definitely be addressing that tonight. What else did we have? Someone asked about the Fortier and Coleman approach to soil. I'm not quite sure how to answer your question, but again, I'm happy to talk to you over email afterwards. And someone asked about life in the soil. You'll probably know more than you wanted to. I'm a soil biologist by training, so you definitely are in the right place. And what else? Someone asked about adding inexpensive amendments. We won't necessarily go into costs, but I'm going to go over several kind of general strategies and pointers. And so as you're trying out different things, hopefully you'll find something that fits into your budget. And then lastly, someone asked about what to look for in buying land. I'll be showing you lots and lots of pictures of soil tonight. So I think you'll hopefully get a good sense of that as we go along. So again, in the theme of how much I love soil, I'd like to start with a quote tonight. Whatever our accomplishments, our sophistication, our artistic pretension, we owe our very existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains. I love that quote, and hopefully you will all come to love it too. I'm aware that not everyone will get as excited as I am, but can't help myself. So first of all, what is soil? And I'm going to start by letting all of you tell me what you think soil is. So here is a picture, and I'd like you to type into the chat box, what do you see? So take a look at all the things in this picture and just type in, and I'll wait for a couple of you to answer what you see in this picture. Yep, someone said they see life. See a nematode, good identification, mites. So lots of different organisms. There are roots, there's grit. Someone said biocycle. You could imagine that there's definitely a cycle going on here of life. What else do you see? Everyone's focusing so far on the living things. What do you think about the things that are not living? Yep, there are air pockets, absolutely. Yep, and so yeah, nitrogen nodules, that's interesting. I'm sure there are some in there. Yeah, and so there are lots and lots and lots of things going on in this picture. Yeah, root hairs for sure. So I'll go ahead and click to the next slide now. So yeah, and this is just a recap because you all are hitting on the major things that are here. So this big thing indeed is a plant root. There are soil particles and water. As you all mentioned, if we look at this little spot right here in the corner, you can see the OM are some bits of organic matter. So we see these bits of organic matter under this kind of little layer of water. We see bacteria, we see fungi and filamentous bacteria kind of wrapping themselves around these soil particles. And so there are lots and lots of ways that these kind of structural soil particles are held together, and lots of different forms of life. And one of the gluey substances that's holding it all together, the spongy organic matter that's so vital to building soil. And one way that I really like to think about this is, I'll erase that. One way that I really like to think about this is almost like the cities or the houses that we live in. So, you know, in a town or a city that we live in, you know, there are roads and buildings, and there are lots of different people doing lots of different jobs. There are people to collect trash, or people to, you know, grow our food. There are teachers. There are people who work in the different shops. And so, just like in the soil, and as all of you noted in this picture, there are many things going on and life forms going on, and the structure of those can be really important. So, you know, if I lived in a city that wasn't held together very well, and I had to worry about buildings crashing down on me all the time, that would be very uncomfortable. Whereas if I knew that there was a stable structure, that'd be a much easier place for me to live in. You know, if I knew that I had a home that I could escape the nematode that's out there waiting to eat me, that also would make me much more secure and able to thrive a lot more than if there were no kind of hidden pockets for me to live in. And so this is kind of the way that we can think of this merging of the living beings in the soil and the physical parts of the soil, much as we do in our cities. And much as we do in our cities, you know, even though we focus on the buildings and the people, those open spaces, you know, a lot of what we walk around in is air and open space, or we have rivers, and those parts of the landscape are very important too, just like in the soil. And so what exactly is soil? So So when we want to define soil, we talk about the fact that soil is about 50% solid material and about 50% air or water pockets, non-solid material. So half the space is not solid. And so this solid material is made up of 3 different size classes, sand, silt, and clay, and those different sizes can greatly change the porosity in the soil. Sand particles are really, really big, and water flows right through them. Clay particles are very, very fine, and silt is in the middle. And then the other 5% of this physical matter is all the organic matter. So all our living organisms, all of that kind of decomposed organic matter, decomposed living organisms that are kind of living there in the soil. And so that's 5%. You know, and as we just saw on the previous slide, despite the fact that it's a small percent, they're doing a really big job. Then the other half of the soil are either air or water, if we have a properly structured soil that can hold that air and water. And then what we end up with in the end is this picture of what soil looks like. And this is just another representation of what I showed before. You can see, I know that picture is a little bit small, but you can see the sand grains, you can see smaller particles and organic matter, and you can see different sizes of spaces and channels that can, you know, capture air or water in different ways, as well as nutrients. And so we talk about kind of 3 keys of soil science: the porosity, the permeability, and the particle sizes. And so the particle, and I will go backwards. So the particle sizes are the 3 particle sizes I just showed you: sand, silt, and clay. And the composition of those can greatly change the structure and the functions of soils. The permeability is the ability of water to move through soil. It's not on my slide, but I would also add air. And then the porosity is the amount of, porosity is the amount of airspace between the soil particles. Pores transmitting oxygen and water through the soil to plant roots. And so in this little picture below, you can see kind of what the pore space looks like in a sandy soil right here versus what it looks like in a clay soil. And so clays are so kind of tightly bound together that there's not a lot of space for pores, whereas there's almost too much space for pores in sandy soils, and everything runs through without really being able to hang on. And so those are kind of the 2 extremes when we're talking only about these mineral physical particles. And then, you know, as we mentioned before, the organic matter and the living organisms kind of add structure to that. And so now we'll kind of zoom in on, again, as we did before, on kind of one group of those mineral and biological particles, and this is the formation of aggregates. So the aggregate is really the basic unit that we think of when we're talking about soil and soil structure. So again, you can see, as we did before, the sand, silt, and clay particles. Here you can see them in their respective size differences. So you can see the clays are tiny, tiny. You can barely see them in the picture. The silt is kind of in the middle, and the sand are these big particles. And then again, you can see the bacteria kind of glomming on with the organic matter, and these actinomycetes, which are filamentous bacteria, and the fungi that kind of physically act to bind these aggregates together by wrapping themselves around the particles. And so, again, this is this merging of what the biological organisms are doing and what the physical structure is doing. And all of that's kind of held together to create these pore and water spaces. And the next slide, I'll show one more aggregate. This one has colors, so it's a little bit easier to see the water and the air spaces. And this is just to show you one more picture of what a soil aggregate looks like. But then also, I want to point out where the water is. And so the water kind of through not hydrophobicity, but it kind of gloms into the smaller areas. So the water will flow through the bigger pores, but through the smaller pores, because of the kind of ionic bonding of water, just like you do on the side of a cup or like a water droplet on a surface, it'll stick together in those corners. And so So these corners are especially important for holding water in the soil. And this is again why the aggregation and the structure are so important for the ability of soil to hold water and to hold air. So that is it for the physical structure of soil. And there are a couple of other things I want to point out about what's important about soil itself. And the first is the chemistry. This is the only math equation I will show today. So the pH of the soil can be really, really important for determining whether nutrients are available or not. So the pH is the negative log of the hydrogen ions, and the context of this is that all of these all these mineral particles in the soil are negatively charged. And so we have this basis of a negatively charged soil, so the amount of these positively charged ions can greatly change how nutrients are available for plants in the soil and how nutrients are passed between microbes and plants. And so this is just one diagram showing, several different nutrients, and I'll focus just on iron because it's a very extreme example. So iron is the fourth or fifth one down, and you can see that it's only available at very, very low pHs. And so I don't have time to get into this today, but both plants and microbes have developed all kinds of interesting strategies to make iron available because, most soils that we farm in or grow our food in are close to a more neutral pH where iron just isn't as available. And that's, most soils. And so, but you can see here the kind of thicker bars are where these different nutrients are more available. And different nutrients are available at different pHs. So this is why pH is a really important thing to know about your soil. And then the other thing that's important, just kind of a fly-by-night, is the physical environment. So the temperature and the level of soil moisture are also really important when we're thinking about how our soil is functioning. So even if we have a soil that is great at holding water, after too long of not getting any water, after too long of a drought, we're still going to have too dry of a soil. And likewise, if it's just getting flooded and flooded and flooded, that soil is going to stay really wet or too wet, even with the best infiltration. And infiltration and soil health can do a lot for adapting to these different conditions, and we'll really focus on this at the end of the talk, but this soil moisture is quite important. And temperature is important as well. The temperature can really change kind of what the organisms in the soil are doing, especially, and also what the plants are doing. So this physical environment is also not something to be overlooked. So that is our kind of very brief fly-by-night about what is soil in the first place. I would take maybe one or two questions if you have any questions about what is soil, and then we'll talk about what makes a healthy soil. So if anyone has a pressing question. I will let you hold your questions then, and we will move on to what makes a healthy soil. And this part's actually really easy because most of what we've been talking about so far and this focus on soil structure is because that's what makes a healthy soil. So we've already discussed some of the important qualities of a healthy soil. So there are lots of active living things. There's lots of organic matter to glue the particles together and also to hold the soil nutrients and hold the water. There's lots of aggregation, and there are aggregates that are even stable in water. This is what supports, even during big flood events or things, that our soil is really staying in place for our plants to grow. The soil is not compacted. There's lots of pore space for air and water, and there's an optimal pH for nutrient availability. And so those are things that make a healthy soil. And more relevant, what does a healthy soil do? What is what is going on there? And so we know that a healthy soil holds a lot more water, lets water infiltrate faster, so there's less flooding or ponding, holds and cycles nutrients, holds the soil in place, so there's less erosion, and the water that comes out doesn't carry as many nutrients or sediments, so they're staying in the soil where they're needed. And so when we have this really nice structure that we talked about, you know, it acts more like a sponge, whereas an unhealthy soil acts more like a brick. So this, you know, this nice structure with all this organic matter can hold water, can hold nutrients, is internally cycling its nutrients. And so when water flows through, the water is cleaner flowing through. And so not only are we contributing to, you know, the nutrition of our own plants and the improvement of our own land, but we're improving to what's going downstream as well, because we're really holding all those nutrients that we've put in. And so this is what a healthy soil does, ideally. And so here's your next chance to answer. Oh, it looks like someone finally did type in a question. So maybe at this point, I will answer your question a little bit later. I'll make a note of that so I don't lose it in the chat stream. But for now, I would like to ask everyone to answer which one of these soils is healthy. And bonus question, why do you think, so someone says the right one, also why do you think the one you're choosing is healthy? Because you're going to start to just copy each other's answers. No, I have more faith in all of you than that. More carbon. Why do you think it has more carbon? And how do you know at all that it's silty? We haven't, yeah, it's holding its shape, it's holding together. What else? Yeah, someone talked about the color. Yeah, that dark color is the color of the organic matter. So the color is really important. Yep, it's holding its shape, exactly. Yep, water holding capacity. The water holding capacity is presumed. I think we could assume that the one on the right has more water holding capacity, but this isn't specifically tested by these pictures, just to be precise about that. But yes, it's quite likely that the one on the right also, because it's holding its shape, we can assume that it also can hold water, and it's holding itself together in water. So yeah, so nice answers there. And here again is another beautiful soil, just to take a better look at what is a really healthy soil. So, and here's a picture of that very first slide that I showed, right? We see an earthworm, we see roots, we see a nice dark color. Someone has picked this up and it's not falling apart in their hands. I put another picture in the bottom here, or a soil like this. As someone mentioned, it has a lot of stability in water. So we can leave this sitting in water or even stir it around and it's going to hold its shape. So it's going to, so all of those organisms and all of that organic matter and all the physical and biological processes holding those different soil particles together are really doing their job. So this is a picture of what a healthy soil looks like. So, you know, so the person in the beginning talking about buying land, you know, bring a shovel with you. It's really, to dig in there with your hands is really the most powerful way to look. It's just, it can be right there for you. And of course, there are lots and lots of ways to take the soil to soil testing labs. Look at the pH, look at the water holding capacity, look at the aggregate stability. But this visual look is really a very, very powerful way to know how healthy is the soil. So now how do we build a healthy soil? So I took this from the website of the Sustainable Farming Association, and they have kind of 5 major decrees, I guess you'd call them. So keeping the soil covered, minimizing the soil disturbance, increasing crop diversity, keeping living roots in the soil, integrating livestock are the 5 major things. And you know, these are a lot of things, and especially integrating livestock can be very challenging for a lot of people. And so the goal is to work on these as you can. You know, can you make, to minimize soil disturbance, you know, can you minimize the number of roads through your fields? Can you maybe cut out 1 tillage event a year? Can you work toward some of these things? And so it's really, you know, appreciating that it's a progression, and that I think a couple of people in the beginning had asked about what to do on their own farms, and you know, a lot of this is really an adventure. A lot of things, you know, a lot of things don't, you know, will work differently on different farms, and so, you know, finding what works best for you and taking on that sense of trial and error can also be really powerful. And I know that maybe someone else could help us with this, but getting together with friends that are trying things as well in your neighborhood can also be, you know, a powerful way to try working on these goals. And so to put this in a different way, basically, you know, we've talked a lot about organic matter. So a positive organic matter budget equals soil health. So adding organic matter, so you can grow more organic matter with high residue rotation so that you're leaving a lot more organic matter on the field. So using sod crops, crops that leave lots of residue, using cover crops that do both, maintaining good fertility, applying manure and compost are all things you can do to add organic matter to your system. And then reducing organic matter losses. So reducing erosion, reducing tillage are 2 ways to reduce the organic matter losses. And in the following slides, I'll dig into specifically what some of these things look like and what some of the research says. So what management changes can be used to increase the input? So you can add cover crops, you can leave crop residues, you can diversify crop rotations, and you can, of course, add other sources of organic material. So these are all ways that organic material can be input back into that land and put back into that soil to build, you know, what is gluing and holding all of our nice aggregates and our nice soil particles together, and to give, you know, a variety of foods to our precious microbes in the soil. So here are some benefits of cover crops. So they cut fertilizer costs by contributing nitrogen to cash crops and by scavenging soil nutrients. So for example, crops grown after legumes can take up 30 to 60% of that legume nitrogen. So it's really beneficial, especially to, you know, to add nutrients in that way. Also, rooted cereals or grasses can scavenge residual soil nitrogen as well and supply it to the following crop. And so having something on the field means that at least something is taking up those nutrients instead of letting them sit or leak out into the groundwater. Also reducing the need for herbicides, reducing insect pests and diseases, preventing soil erosion, conserving soil moisture, and protecting water quality. And so, you know, all of these cover crops and the roots especially, I mean, I didn't point that out enough on that slide, but the fact that, you know, whatever you do to the top of the cover crop when you terminate it, whether you incorporate it or whether you just kill the plant with an herbicide when it's time to plant your cash crop, like the roots are still growing there. And so the roots are still holding, you know, doing their job to add soil carbon and to build that soil structure. And so just to talk a little bit more about the benefit of cover crops, I wanted to highlight a project that I've been involved in just over the last year with the NRCS here in Minnesota. So many of you that are here from Minnesota, I might even have soil from your county in my lab right now. We took samples from all over the state in the fall. And so this was based on the NRCS, which is the National Resource Conservation Service's Soil Health Initiative. And so what they did was a 5-year agreement to plant multi-species cover crops annually on the same acreage. And this is part of an EQUIP program, another program that the USDA has. And so what we did last fall was to sample either from land. Most farms had land that were either in this program or not in this program. And you can see in the picture that even split where, in this picture, you can see this kind of even split where someone had this beautiful cover crops on one side and absolutely nothing on the other side. And so we then went out and examined, oh, and also there's no fall tillage. That's also a part of the deal. So tillage, we'll talk about tillage in a minute, but tillage is part of this deal as well. And so we made physical assessments of soil health in fall of 2016. That was mostly done by my NRCS partners. So we actually went out and dug soil pit on both the cover cropped or not cover cropped fields. We looked at bulk density. We did a full analysis of infiltration and porosity. And so we're still kind of compiling that data. And now we're processing the data now we're processing samples in my lab for other things like aggregate stability, microbial activity. We're doing a standard fertility workup to also see how this compares to the fertility that you'd look at to determine how you're going to add nutrients to your field in the next fall. And so you can see in some of these pictures, I think especially because it was such an extremely warm fall, we had some gorgeous cover crops growing, and you can see in those pictures at the top are a little small, but you can see all the roots, you can see all the pore structures. Some of these were just teeming with earthworms. And so the results of this already that are coming in are that we're seeing that, oh, and in my description here, the NCC are not cover cropped fields and the CC are cover cropped fields. And so we're seeing penetrometer, which is the measure of compaction. We're much higher in the non-cover cropped fields as we would expect. They're more compacted because they don't have that porosity and structure, that 50% pore space that we look for in a really nice, well-developed, healthy soil. The soil temperature is actually more moderate, so the cover crops fields are actually not responding as much to temperature. We will get back to temperature at the end of this talk and how really important of a result that is. The cover crops had a lot higher earthworm counts. They are, although, the specific field we were in and its status depended, changed that result a little bit. We also saw more infiltration, and we saw kind of a qualitative difference in the cover crops field. So this was, late in the fall, October and November, and we definitely noticed that where fields had been well cover cropped, we could actually walk in them instead of mucking through and falling down or getting sucked down into the mud. Like where there had been a cover cropped field, we were actually walking in it and functioning in it. And so from that point of view, we could kind of experience that soil structure as well. So these are some of our initial results of, kind of what the power of cover cropping and even of a little bit of reduced tillage. And so I also want to show some data from a paper on the benefits of diverse cropping systems. And so this is a paper where if you move, in this data, if you move from left to right, there are more diverse cover cropping systems. And so they go from kind of continuous corn or only corn and soybeans to rotation including wheat, or rotations including 2 or 3 of those cash crops with cover crops. And so over time, they're looking at how the diversity is affecting, how the diversity or the number of different things being planted over time in these plots is affecting some of these soil structural properties. And so, and what's interesting, as with cover cropping, is that these aren't all happening at the same time. Sometimes these are 3-year rotations. And so what they were finding, though, is that with this diversity of different plants and with the and with cover crops, though here it was really just the number of different plants. The cover crops weren't such an extreme result in this study, but you can see that the number of large aggregates. So if I'm looking at the panel on the left, this is the number of large aggregates, and then we also have the number of water stable aggregates, and you can see that they're going up and up with this increased diversity. And then on the panel on the right, it's kind of the same story, only here we're looking at the amount of either carbon or the amount of nitrogen in these aggregates. And so the carbon is the measure of the organic matter. So when we talk about organic matter, it's mostly carbon. It contains a lot of other nutrients as well, and that's where the benefit of saying organic matter is a better definition, because it includes all these other properties, the stickiness and the fact that organic matter, because it's decomposed living things, has lots of different nutrients in it, but it's mostly carbon. So measuring the carbon in those aggregates can be, a really good index of how much organic matter is in those aggregates. And then the nitrogen, of course, is just a good measure of the fertility. And you can see that the nitrogen result wasn't as dramatic, but that the organic matter is really, going up and up with this diversity. And so again, just having different types of plants growing over time, even if it's over time, is really contributing to the structure and the health of these soils. And so now, how specifically does tillage affect soil organic matter decomposition? So there are several ways that this happens. The first is that residues are mixed with the soil, so physically breaking the residue into smaller pieces. It aerates the soil, so microbes actively eat all of that organic matter. They kind of, they get this breath of all the oxygen coming in, and they kind of go to town. It also breaks up the soil aggregates, and so all that, from the previous slide, if you remember that picture of the aggregate in the beginning where all that carbon is kind of held in the middle of this aggregate, when we till, we're breaking that all open, and so the microbes and the different organisms can get at that organic matter to eat where it was before protected from them. And then it promotes erosional losses, right? Because we're disturbing everything and mixing it up, so it's not intact anymore. And so to show you this in a cartoon, as I promised, I'm very microbially focused. So the cartoons on the left are, I know these are kind of hard to see, so I'll read them to you, without tillage. So these little, Pac-Man-like microbes are saying, "Help, I can't breathe. I can't get enough energy to make my enzymes. Our residues got left in all the tight places, we can't eat them." So the little pink gluey parts are their, they're decomposed bodies of the previous microbes that are nutrient rich but stuck in that soil, gluing those pieces together. And then the other thing that can happen is these microbes on the outside. There's got to be a way inside. Looks like there's good stuff in there. This stuff is just all gritty. And so there's both this physical protection as well as these limitations of the air and water. So then when we till, it's like blowing that all up. So it's a party. We can finally get at this stuff. Finally, some air in here. And so, even though, we talk a lot about having all of this organisms and how active they are, we only, an ideal soil only has them active to a degree, because if they're too active, if we're really aerating, then all the organisms that can use that air to quickly decompose organic matter are going to do it, and we're going to lose all of that soil structure. And so this is my little, well, it's actually from a textbook, but this is a little cartoon of what's happening with tillage. So that's most of what I'm going to cover about what is organic matter, how can we build organic matter, and now I'm going to move into kind of how this relates to how we adapt to changing weather. And so I will pause for maybe just one or two questions, if you have any immediate questions about soils or soil health. And then we'll cover this last part, and then we'll hopefully have a little bit of, we'll still have a little bit of time for questions at the end. So.
There was the question about tilling debris into a garden.
So, yeah, so tilling debris into a garden. I know that I think it depends on the degree of tillage. So, getting, really light tillage or like a surface incorporating that debris can improve its incorporation and decomposition into organic matter. But you have to strike a balance with, really breaking up all of your soil. Someone else asked it, so is tilling a good thing? And my point is that no, tilling is not a good thing. We want to avoid tilling or reduce tilling because, those microbes are excited and chewing through all that organic matter. It means that organic matter is not there to hold all of those mineral soil particles together. And so, as with those kind of 5 principles of soil health from the Sustainable Farming Association, we want to reduce disturbance as much as possible. So tilling is not something that will help soil health. I mean, of course, for a lot of people, tilling is something that's really unavoidable, especially in organic systems where you're limited on the ability to control weeds. But thinking about kind of how are you wise about when you need to till or when you choose to till is a goal. When should you choose to till? It really depends on the system that you're working in. And I'm sorry I can't be more specific, but it really is more of a case-by-case, not necessarily an exact case-by-case basis, but it's much more case-by-case because in different systems, it will make sense for you to till at different times. Or it might make sense for you to not till at all. That might work for your farm. So, yeah, so I'm sorry I can't give a blanket answer to that, but there's just such a diversity of, farming systems and farms that it wouldn't matter. How about a vineyard soil? I would have to, if you want to email me, again, my email address is at the end of the talk, and I could look up a little bit more information specifically about vineyards. As far as I know, at least and this is the Western U.S., so it might not have anything to do with you. Many vineyards are not tilled at all. And actually, I had a picture in here that I took out that showed, grass growing in a vineyard. So having, that not bare soil and having grass growing in the alleys between the grapevines is actually something that at least I've seen as common practice. So adding chicken compost, and then someone said, what about garden boxes? So I assume that these are related questions, and I'll answer these questions and then wrap up the rest of this talk. Should I lay it on top and let it permeate down into the soil? I would say, again, you might want to at least incorporate it a little bit into the surface just so that it kind of stays in place, and then let it permeate down into the soil. So, and that might depend on the time of year that you're adding it as well. So if you're adding it spring or fall when there are a lot of rain events, yeah, you might want to incorporate it really gently into the surface just so that it's staying in place, is what I would recommend. And I hope that answers your question about garden boxes. And garden boxes are a little bit different situation, right? Because they, you might not have runoff as you would in a big field. Another goal of this is that kind of light incorporation will also help ensure that compost is really at the level of the roots that so that, as your plants grow, that compost is the most available to, that compost and all of those rich nutrients are the most available. So, yeah, so that would be my other thought on adding compost and chicken manure. One thing I would add, because you added both chicken poop and compost, is that raw manure can have a lot more labile nutrients. So the process of composting will, kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Will kind of fix those nutrients into a less labile or easily removed form. So that raw manure that you add is going to have, a lot of nitrates or ammoniums that will leak out right away, whereas compost is kind of more processed and more of a slow release fertilizer instead of more like liquid fertilizer, if you will. And so that's another consideration, as well as the fact that because you're adding, other things to the compost, you're adding a lot more other organic matter. So yeah, so those would be my thoughts on those questions. So now the last thing I want to talk about is, what does soil health have to do with changing weather? So here's my last question for you for the evening. Do you think that the weather has been normal this year? And you can just use your little raising your hand, or you can use your, here, we'll do yes or no. So especially for those of us in Minnesota, I can't promise I'll know the answer for your part of the country, although I probably do. So use your little green check or your little X and tell me if you think, what you think the weather's been like this year. So I would say a red X means you think it's kind of normal state of affairs, and a green check would mean that you think that things are not as per usual. I see a couple of no's in the chat, so maybe. So I'm already seeing a lot of green checks. Are things different? I'll give you just another minute for any more people to answer if you think that things are unusual. I'm not wearing a sweater in my office, and it's the middle of February in the Twin Cities, if that tells you about my opinion at all. And no, I do not have a well climate adjusted office. So looks like we've gotten a green check. So normally in my office at this time of year, I'm wearing hand warmers. It also is, I think, a poor testament to the state of the building I am in. But these puppies have already been put away. And the President's Day snowshoe hike I signed up for with my son is probably going to be canceled. So, at least in this particular season, things are pretty different here in Minnesota. The other testament to how different things have been, actually last fall was one of our longest growing seasons on record, which to the Soil Health Initiative was actually a blessing because we had so many things going on earlier in the fall that we were just praying for every day without frost so that we could get this sampling in, and it happened until the middle of November. And so so that is just the kind of brief look. People are also saying, yep, we have more extremes. We have more extremes in the temperature and precipitation. We have heavier winds. Yep, all of those things are happening, and without a doubt. And I'm not going to go into why those things are happening, why we're seeing changes in our weather, why we're going to continue to see changes in our weather. But of course, if you're interested in that, feel free to email me. I have plenty of materials for you. But today I'm going to focus on assuming that we know that things are changing, and what does it have to do with soil and soil health. And so this is adapted from a figure from a paper from a few years ago, but I think the material still stands. So in a changing world, we are also starting to have increased night temperatures, so which can be a stress for crops. Likened to, you know, in the middle of the summer when it's humid, a lot of us don't sleep well. Crops are kind of the same. Their projected overall temperatures of increasing 2 to 6 degrees, and as many of you noted, and this is the thing I think that's most apparent to us when we're trying to think about how to grow our crops and how to grow our gardens and what to wear on a given day, is this changing weather and more floods and droughts and extreme events. Paired with this is this kind of worldwide issues of food insecurity and changing markets. And so on one hand, we're seeing decreasing per capita food grains. We're seeing, I realized a typo, this should say 1,020 million food insecure people. This is worldwide, malnutrition. And then where, at least in countries like the US, we're also at the same time seeing this trend that where people can afford to buy food, consumers are more and more choosing sustainably sourced products in the mix of all of this. And so, and this is just a piece from this paper that doesn't have as much to do with our talk tonight, but our energy demand. So this paper was specifically talking about, it was specifically also talking about bioenergy crops and how the growing of bioenergy crops mixed with food insecurity is kind of even this, it added additional pressure on the land and pressure on our soils. And so at the middle of all of this is still sustainable soil management, or, you know, as we're calling it, you know, in this talk, soil health. And so if we look, again, this is a worldwide view. So it's, you know, I'll kind of zoom back into our local area after this. But if we look worldwide, these are some projections of what we expect in the future, or what might already be, you know, the glimmer of starting to happen. And so you can see that, you know, on the left-hand side, we have tropical versus temperate regions. So you can see that in temperate regions like ours, we're at much greater risk of a loss in yields. And then if you also look, you can see that this is pretty specific to different crops. So wheat and corn are much more at risk for decreasing yields than soy or than rice. But this is what we expect in the future. At the same time, there was this, oh, and I know we're almost at 7, so I'm just about done. This is another study where you can see they looked at yield volatility. So this is the risk that the yields will go down in you know, the effect of a extreme drought or a flood, or you know, or a heat wave or something like that. What's the volatility? And you can see that across these kind of high agricultural states, Minnesota is actually in some of the best shape for low volatility of our yields. So we actually have very stable yields, very resilient yields, other than this one little part of the state, which so happens to be the Anoka sand plain. And so that's a little hint of when they did this analysis of why. So why Minnesota? Why do we have this more resilient or more adapted yields? So they looked at all of these different factors. So the maximum temperature and precipitation, the minimum yield potential, the variability, and all of these soil factors. And what they found was that it is the soil moisture retention. So the plasticity of the soil, that's the another indication of the structure and the structural integrity and the water holding content. And so what's odd is that the organic matter, is related and didn't play a role here, but this water holding capacity that we know is really important for soil health is exactly what gives us more resilient yields and is exactly what gives us more adaptation to this fluctuating weather. And so as we, focus, for so many other reasons on our soil health and our soil quality, that also is really helping us to improve our adaptation to changing weather conditions. And so it's this kind of long-term way of thinking about our resiliency and our adaptation. And so again, here's just one little more cartoon. Sorry, I know I'm going over time, so I will let you look at this in detail later. But again, it's about soils and water and food security. And then I would just encourage you to see for yourself. So go dig into your soil, maybe when it's not frozen. So maybe today, it still is February, even though it's an extremely warm February. So, does it hold its form or does it crumble? If you squirt it with water, does it stay clear? Is it hard to dig into? Maybe it's too compacted. Does it smell sweet and earthy? This is the smell of organic materials. If it smells like rotten eggs, it means that it's those are anaerobic processes, and so it's not getting enough air or water flow through. And so these are some things you can see for yourself. And then to end on a disgusting note, if digging isn't good enough for you, you can soil your undies. So this is a really funny test. If you have a 6-year-old at home, this might be perfect. To go check their underwear out in the soil because the worms and the organisms will really start to chew them up. And so it's this great kind of funny test. Maybe a middle schooler would also be appropriate to see how well, and you could see that conventional corn versus some of these low input systems that the organisms have really kind of been going to town on this. So those are some ways to kind of get out and have fun and really look at your soil yourself. And so with that, I'll say thanks, and I'll turn it back over. Maybe we'll hear from Ben about whether we should stay on to still take questions. I'm happy to stay for a few more minutes, or whether we should close it up.
There was one question from earlier, I'm not sure if you got to. It was, should we use organic matter as the primary metric to know if they are treating their soil well, or are there other crucial measurements? Soil organic matter is definitely the number one, because it's related to all of these other things. But there are also other metrics you can do. So you can look at fertility. You can look, I mentioned in the beginning, you can look at the pH. So most soil testing labs will look at the pH of your soil for you. If you want to do it back of the envelope, you can actually go to an aquarium store. So if you have fish at home, you can get the little tabs that you can just, kind of mix some water with your soil and see very roughly with those tabs. But soil testing labs, or if you're having your soil tested at all, will always look at the pH for you as well. But yeah, the organic matter is still a really crucial thing to look at. I guess one other thing I would add is that there are also these other indicators of the different size particle classes that you have. And so, if you really want to look into the soil, having a baseline of the nutrition, having a baseline of, do you have a really sandy soil? Do you have a really clay soil? Those things can interact with the organic matter.
Ben, I think also she was asking about how, if you could use some sort of measurements to track how well the farmland's been treated. And so I'll put my email in the chat. I think there's somebody from Extension that we could get you connected with, Teresa, to more fully dive into that question that you have.
Great, thank you.
Oh, yeah. I'm seeing that question now. Yep, absolutely.
And one last question we'll take, and then if there are other additional ones, feel free to email Jess. Her email is up there, jgut@umn.edu. And the question from Sherry, do worms survive in Minnesota's winter?
Oh, there you go. Yeah. I mean, they go dormant, but I mean, they absolutely survive. We see them first thing in the spring. So, yes.
Good questions.
Yeah,
All
those
right.
are all great questions. And yeah, and as we mentioned, I'm also happy to dig in more to some of the questions if anyone wants to email me.